Welcome to the FML podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shamir Sajdev, and some of fintech's hardest-hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone to today's episode of the FML podcast. Today we're joined by Harshil Varsani, Head of Creative at TotallyMoney. And today we're going to be talking about unleashing fintech's creative edge. So to kick us off, Harshil, first and foremost, thanks very much for joining us today. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Hey.
To kick us off, Harshil, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey so far.
I am Head of Creative at TotallyMoney. I've been creative for quite a while now. Have had an interest in design and marketing sort of since before university, and studied that at uni as well. And then I've worked across a variety of industries and roles, from large international corporates to agencies to startups as well. So have been fortunate enough to kind of work across a number of different roles and experience sort of all sorts in different industries.
So before we really get stuck in, could you just tell us a little bit more about TotallyMoney, who they are, what they do, and then also your role as head of creative?
TotallyMoney is a fintech. It's a credit app that helps people with their credit scores. So what we do is we help people understand their credit score, their credit report. We show them ways in how they can improve it and how people can be better with their finances. So we'll show you credit products like cards and loans that are suited to our customers and essentially help them borrow a bit better. My role as head of creative, I look after the creative team at the company, and it's a mixed group of copywriters, designers, illustrators, motion designers, UX writers. So quite an integrated creative team. And what we do is we look after essentially everything from the look and feel of the brand to how we communicate to our customers. I
do want to jump in and talk about, I suppose, creativity within fintech. But before I do that, we've got to talk about sort of the foundations of that. And the foundation of any sort of production of creative is the team behind it. What goes into creating a high functioning creative team, and what strategies do you employ to create a productive, motivated creative team?
The biggest thing is that it does take time. So I've joined the business about 4 years ago, and when I joined, there was no sort of creative function. When I sort of started there, it wasn't a case of kind of building a massive team sort of straight away. You kind of have to take that time to understand the needs of the business and kind of how everyone works, and sort of growing that team. So from 2 digital designers that were in place at the time to early this year, where we had a team of 10, that takes time to develop and sort of mold into what the business needs and sort of adapt as well of how we operate as a team. And I think the key sort of aspects into what makes the team work is kind of having the right rituals in place. So figuring out what our routines are, how we come together as a group, and essentially figuring out that internal team culture. Because we've got obviously what the business culture is like, and we kind of work within that space, but also kind of as a team, like what makes us tick, how do we work, what's that dynamic between us. So that's been sort of a really important part. And then the final part, I suppose, is also having a clear vision for the team. So almost kind of thinking of what's the purpose of our team, or what's the purpose of the function, and then what value can we as a team bring to the table to the rest of the business.
From your experience, perhaps at past organizations or perhaps at competitors, where do you think companies or brands that have looked to build a high-performing team, where do you think they've gone wrong?
Yeah, I think at previous organizations, perhaps, or what I've seen sort of out in the industry is sometimes teams or senior people within organizations kind of focus on the hierarchies too much. So when they think they need to build out a team, they kind of think they need X amount of senior people and then a bunch of juniors, and it'll all work because the seniors know what they're doing and they'll tell the juniors what to do. But I think for my team, we grew a lot of that talent in-house, and a lot of the seniors in my team are those that have developed and sort of progressed their way into that role. And they've kind of, in that time, built up their knowledge as to how the business works, how the industry works, kind of even in the function as well. So they've contributed a lot into, what it means to be a senior creative in the team. And I think that's important to build a team around that vision that you've set, so that everyone's kind of working towards that common goal.
I suppose one of the other questions, sort of around that is, how does diversity sort of factor in to the productivity of your team?
I think it's one of the biggest contributing factors. I think having a diverse team from a range of skills to range of backgrounds and experiences, to me, I think that's what makes the team work. Having different people on the team with different ideas and different ways to approach ideas is really important, because you as an individual or you as a creative leader, you're not going to have all the answers, and you need a team that will support you, but support each other as well.
One thing you mentioned was obviously not having all the ideas, and obviously you've got to rely upon your team to fill in those gaps. What are you looking for when you're hiring someone into your team? What are the qualities, and what would be, I suppose, your advice in selecting the right talent?
Yeah, essentially, I try and find people that are better than me in terms of their skills or their approaches to things. I know that I can't do some of the things that my team can because they're all exceptional creatives, but my role as a creative leader is to work for them and to bring out those qualities and help connect the dots. So looking for people that, again, have that diverse range of skills, have things that have knowledge in areas that, you might have not done a lot of work in, but they can bring that to the table and bring that to the team. I look for individuals that are going to challenge this. They're going to push for, a better outcome for our team and for the function as well.
Your experience obviously spans both obviously in-house and agency. So, I'm probably part of that camp as well. I used to be in-house and now obviously run an agency, but it'd be great to kind of hear it from we're obviously not a creative agency, but it'd be great to hear from your perspective. What's the difference between leading creative functions in-house versus, at an agency?
There are some key differences, and it's important to kind of recognize the sort of benefits of both. So when I worked at agencies, I think the work can sometimes become a bit functional. So, you're working to a brief and there's a lot of decision makers in the process from the agency side and from the client side as well. But I've definitely found it's a really great place to work on your technical skills, hone your craft, produce some really creative work and innovative work that sometimes you don't get the opportunity in-house. But in-house, on the flip side, you're kind of forced to adapt and sometimes almost learn how to break the brief a little bit and still deliver because, things change, goalposts move, and in-house you kind of need to be a bit more fluid. But to me, I don't know, I find that a bit more rewarding almost because you're embedded into the challenges and goals of the business. So working in-house, I think you just have almost a different sort of an end goal and things are sort of not sort of complete, just sort of brief by brief. So it's definitely a different experience on which side of the coin you are.
There's a little phrase you said there, which is break the brief. And I really, really like that. And it kind of leads me on to a bit of a follow-up question. Look, I mean, we see it on our side, which is, sometimes we have to play the game of guess what's in the client's head. And I suspect you'll have that with your counterparts. Guess what's in the head of marketer's head. As a creative, what would be your advice or recommendations as to how the creative adjacent teams and functions can communicate effectively with the creative team in order to help them deliver the best work?
Yeah, I think communication is really important, even at brief stage and kind of understanding the requirements of the brief and things like that. It's really important for the creative teams and for the client or internal client, whether that's the marketing team or commercial team or whoever that might be, is to work on sort of what's that end goal, what's the challenge you're trying to solve. And for both teams to sort of understand that problem is super important. I think sometimes people focus on what's it going to look like or what's it going to sound like or things like that. But actually, it's more around kind of what does the end thing solve? And, if that is kind of meeting the criteria, that's kind of, to me, a successful outcome of working within that brief. I think what doesn't work is sometimes when you have clients saying simply, I don't like it, because obviously that's not constructive. But also with design and copy and sort of anything creative, sometimes things can move into being subjective and kind of it's just based on that person's opinion. And so, you mentioned like trying to figure out what's in the client's head sort of thing. That is sometimes influenced by a number of things, their personal preferences and kind of what they see in the market and stuff. But is it actually solving the objectives? And if it's not, then maybe, we need to figure out what the essential baseline problem is. The role of creative is to produce work that answers the brief. And so giving feedback should be on how has this creative piece of work answered the brief. So if they don't like it, it's almost as if to say they don't like it because actually it's not hitting these goals that I had in my head. And that's what you're trying to figure out in the beginning stages, because that's what essentially a creative team should be trying to do. They should be trying to solve problems. And so, yeah, when you're communicating, both teams should be trying to essentially figure out what that is.
How can these sort of creative adjacent individuals or teams empower their creative functions? And just as sort of like, a bit of personal experience, sometimes, when I was in house, we had a couple of designers, and they were kind of always seen as the order takers. I think the downside of that was, we weren't always getting the best work from them. And, from my perspective, I always try to give them sort of freedom to try and sort of play with an idea. But it'd be great to kind of hear from your perspective. How have you managed to sort of help empower your team and get support from these other functions to help empower them?
Yeah, I think that's definitely an issue that comes up time and time again at sort of various places I've worked at. And it kind of comes from when you're kind of a bit more junior in your career, you get sort of work given to you from your manager or from sort of other teams, and you work to a specific brief and you pass that back again. When I joined the business, I think that's kind of how it was kind of perceived, where it's a bit of a production house. You get given all these different things. We need a logo like this, we need designs like this, and then you kind of send it back. And trying to shift that's essentially what I've been trying to do for the last few years, is shift that approach of actually creative is a partner with the other departments in the business. And so we have tried to do a number of things, working on processes, working on kind of education and workshops and things like that, to essentially just get brought in a lot more earlier. And so that comes to the point of having autonomy, having a creative team that's empowered to make creative decisions. And that comes to, if a internal client, for example, is asking for X amount of emails, for example, the creative team can actually ask, why those emails and why not something else instead? And, where are the emails going to? And kind of, trying to essentially challenge that and figure out what the best output is. So I think that goes a long way in empowering creative teams and essentially having them perceived and looked at as a standalone function within the sort of wider marketing team and rest of the business.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Our creative function kind of sat as part of the marketing team, but I think I was to do it all over again, I probably would have pulled them out of that and almost set them up independently and give them a lot more autonomy. We were kind of talking about, I think before we kind of click the record button, about sectors that really suffer from a lack of creativity. And I think number one is financial services. And I don't think fintech is kind of too far behind that. And it's a difficult space to be in. I think one of the challenges around sort of the fintech and financial services space, that sort of consistency piece, and then also at the same time, trying to make an app, a platform, or a credit card compelling visually, and sometimes obviously written as well. So with that in mind, I'd be great to kind of hear your take and how you've done this with TotallyMoney. How have you maintained consistency, but also at the same time ensure that the creative that you're producing is compelling? And then also then, to some extent as well, maintaining that across different channels and mediums as well.
It definitely needs to build up over time. I think you first need to assess kind of what's happening within the business, and I spent some time when I first joined to figure out kind of how creative works, essentially could work at TotallyMoney, and thinking sort of beyond, just marketing. Now we work with all sorts of teams within the business, from the commercial team to the product teams to even internal sort of how we kind of do our internal branding for staff as well. So I think ensuring consistency comes from having that vision that I mentioned earlier, kind of having a clear vision as to what's the purpose of our function and what's the purpose of our team. And with that, I think you can create a bunch of processes and have various frameworks and brand guidelines and stuff that you can refer to, but also kind of evolve as your brand grows as well. And that kind of serves as a good way to keep things consistent. So we do a bunch of things where we'll have pages on Notion where we'll have kind of almost like guidelines that anyone can refer to, but we can also kind of hold ourselves accountable to as well. So we can make sure that the work is following some of these kind of wider guidelines. And also, I think from my perspective as leading the creative function is also to get involved in the work as well. I try and do that where possible, and I know I'm not going to get involved in every single project, and I'm not able to sometimes. But sometimes when you are able to do the work, you can also understand maybe some of the challenges that the rest of the team are facing, or even come up with newer ideas that you might not have been able to sort of without getting stuck into the work. So that also helps kind of setting that creative direction as well, because you're not kind of just setting it from that top down approach, which I think is very rare that's the only thing that you can do and that it will work 100% of the time. I think the direction definitely gets shaped by the rest of the team. And so, everyone contributing to that vision and the way we work and the processes and the frameworks and stuff, that goes a long way in kind of making sure that everyone's on board, everyone's kind of working from the same playbook. And, we're all also learning what's working, what isn't, and kind of feeding that back and adapting and moving and growing from there as well.
We spoke about obviously the impact of sort of creative adjacent functions into creative. And then, we've just sort of spoken about how to kind of keep that work, compelling and fresh and consistent. But I think anyone who's worked sort of within fintech and financial services will probably attest to the fact that one of the biggest blockers to creativity can be the compliance team. Perhaps not them directly, but certainly the regulation that they're trying to enforce. And I suppose to a certain extent as well, where you're in an industry that is sort of upheld by a lot of traditions to a certain degree as well. How do you balance that? Because obviously, you just go onto TotallyMoney's website and it feels friendly, it feels inviting. How do you balance that? I suppose that creativity piece with, I suppose, regulation, compliance, and I suppose the traditional heritage.
That can definitely be hard, and it's like a double-edged sword almost. You want the team to be creative and innovative and push the boundaries of the brand and stuff, but you also know that there are sort of regulations and things that you need to stay within the rule books of as well, and that could be sometimes limiting potentially as well. So yeah, there's definitely a constant battle internally of how what can we do to keep things moving forward and essentially keeping TotallyMoney look and feel appealing and relevant and all sorts. I think when you're working internally, I think this is one of the good things about being in-house is that building relationships across the business is super important. And we work really well with our internal compliance team and legal teams because we're able to work with them very much at the ideation stage and kind of think about all the things that we think are really relevant to our customers, but also having that time to really understand our customers through research and data and insights, so that when we're producing work, we are trying to essentially stay true to our brand and stay true to our customers, being empathetic, being realistic. And at the end of the day, we want our customers to use our brand and interact with our brand in an authentic way as much as possible. So yeah, working closely with the compliance teams, getting that knowledge into the creative team as well, having that almost a little bit of having that commercial knowledge of kind of how the industry works and kind of who our customers are, and getting really closely to that data, I think is really important to strike that balance.
So I think if we kind of go back probably more than 5 years ago now, but at least 5 years, the challenge for fintechs at the time was to not quite define what fintech means, but try and get the target customer and the general public, the audience, comfortable with new disruptive ways of managing their money or purchasing insurance or banking online via an app. But I think moving on to kind of where we are now in sort of 2023, I think it was a little bit of period in time, probably about a year and a bit ago, where a lot of the fintech kind of like websites kind of look the same. And it feels like now everyone kind of realized that now it's about actually differentiating from each other. I think we've gone away from being this homogenous group of fintechs, and we've really started seeing some sort of breakthrough brands kind of pop out. And from a creative perspective, it'll be really, really interesting to hear about, I suppose, your journey and Totally Money's journey over the last few years, and how you've differentiated Totally Money and how you've managed to stand out from the crowd. And I suppose what has underpinned that really as well.
Yeah, I think this is where having an authentic voice is really important, and kind of using that as the differentiating factor. So, not trying to find differentiation in the brand look and feel as such, or kind of the visual side of things, and kind of letting that do all of the work. I think it really comes down to like the mission of the business. So, for example, like our company's mission is to be the UK's most loved financial app for the underserved, offering plans and products to unlock a life of more choices. For the creative team, what that means is essentially laddering that down. And what we kind of try and do is break down that complexity of credit for customers. And essentially, we're trying to build trust for the Totally Money brand. And I think that building trust element is really important to do in a realistic way. And if you can do that well, then that's where the authenticity comes from. In our team mission and the way we approach work and kind of how we follow that mission, it's all about working towards this overarching sort of guideline. So, for example, the company mission and the team vision, and off the back of that, some of our frameworks use the words of being supportive. Now, that kind of works up to building trust, and we can do that in a way, through sort of being reflective in the words that we use or the imagery we put together, and that's how it all kind of works its way up to that overarching company mission. But I think that's a really important way to kind of stay relatable and relevant to customers, and that's essentially what will get you to stand out amongst the crowd.
I suppose, like with every area of marketing, you have believers and non-believers, right? You'll have hardcore performance marketers who believe that brand is irrelevant, and then it will be the other way around, where you have those that believe that brand is everything, and one can overconsume data. It can be great to hear from your perspective as someone leading a creative function, to what you feel the impact of creative is when it comes to, I suppose, customer acquisition fundamentally. But you could probably expand that out and say, what do you think your overall impact on the customer is, including customer acquisition?
I don't think you can be in sort of one camp or the other. I think they need to work side by side. So you need to work on brand related marketing activity, but also performance marketing still sort of works alongside that. And I think the brand is something that underpins all of that. So I think looking at sort of creative output and essentially trying to get to that end goal of customer acquisition, they need to be sort of nuanced in a way where you can focus on the data and kind of making sure you're getting to the customers in the right places and things like that. But essentially your brand and how you come across to these customers, it's what's going to help customers move down that funnel from, getting that brand awareness to ultimately use your company or use your brand and then keep coming back to that brand. So performance definitely comes into play throughout that process, and I think brand is right alongside of it.
Just to expand upon sort of performance versus sort of brand, when it comes to sort of production of creative for performance channels, so the typical sort of the Facebooks, TikTok now, and even LinkedIn, and et cetera. The big difference obviously between performance and brand is obviously, if you're putting an out-of-home campaign out of there, that piece of content can sit out there for weeks on end. However, obviously with kind of like performance activity, I mean, you could be churning through ad creative at a horrendous pace. I know the guys at Zilch, I think they're doing sort of a couple of hundred pieces of creative a day. I know Peloton was doing 150 ads a day or something like that. It was ridiculous. So it's quite a big question, but how do you, as a creative team, keep ideation fresh with your creative and collateral that you're producing for performance channels, while still at the same time staying on brand, but also factoring in the data that's coming in from the performance team, i.e., photography based ads are performing better than iconography based ads. We need more of this sort of collateral. How do you manage that? How do you balance it? How do you make sure that you haven't got a diminishing quality? So huge question, but
yeah, no, I think that is a good question, and definitely a challenge we've faced at times as well. I think where we've worked on campaigns, or if you're just looking at the overarching sort of brand. For me and my team, I think we've been able to navigate that through having somewhat of a clear framework as to kind of what's the top level stuff, and is that kind of the stuff that goes out sort of in the long term? Is it the TV campaign and the out of home, print stuff and whatnot? And then how do we kind of bring this down into smaller pockets of work, and where in the customer journey are the customers sort of accessing this type of work or this type of creative output? I mentioned sort of earlier on is that, one element of working in-house is being able to adapt and being fluid in kind of how you approach work. And essentially it's trying to stay on top of that freshness of something hasn't worked, we'll quickly change a couple of elements and put that back out again, using kind of research and testing and the data from that to see what is working, what isn't, but not kind of losing sight of that overarching stuff where you have been super creative and innovative, and you've got, all sorts of really high performing stuff at the top of the sort of platform. So all of your sort of TV campaign work, and then finding like the elements that you can then bring out of that and spread that through the various sort of smaller campaigns. So like all the way down to like a Facebook ad. And part of the question you asked of kind of how do you keep that sort of fresh and things like that is essentially just having regular conversations as a team, regular ideation sessions and workshops to bring out that innovation. And so some ideas aren't always used straight away. Some things we can kind of come back to, and some things are used for other things altogether. So, trying to make sure that everyone kind of has a say and that input comes in from all parts of the team or the wider team, which is another kind of argument for why having diversity in your team is super important, because these ideas and these kind of experiences and knowledge sort of come from everywhere.
Nearly all brands that are running any sort of performance activity will kind of come across that problem, and it can sometimes get a bit same, where it feels like you're perhaps swapping out stock images, or you're almost like rearranging deck chairs a little bit at times. But yeah, it's kind of great to hear it from kind of your perspective, especially sort of in-house, where you've got a broad view on kind of all of the different channels. We're obviously quite siloed in just sort of like the performance piece. What's sort of next for you? What's next for TotallyMoney, and where do you leading the creative function? I suppose where do you want to take the creative function next at TotallyMoney?
Looking ahead at the next year or couple of years, things like cost of living, the market, interest rates, it's a tough time for everyone, and how long that's going to last, no one knows. And so I think it's really important now more than ever that people have access to the right sort of information and tools and products that will help them, and TotallyMoney is in the right space to kind of enable that and help people do that. So looking at ways and how we as a team internally can improve that engagement with customers, how we can continue to build that trust and just scale that brand awareness, I think is sort of the next area for us, because we've, fortunately got a good amount of customers who do trust our brand and kind of keep coming back to us, and they really advocate for our brand. And now it's just about taking that and telling more people about it. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in the content creator space and kind of using customer advocacy to kind of boost that reach. And we're looking at ways and how we can kind of maximize that and kind of capitalize on that. So yeah, I know my team are quite excited about that idea of kind of reaching further and further and wider. And it definitely opens up a lot more opportunities and possibilities of potentially, working with others in the industry, working with other content creators or other brands and businesses, and essentially, just sharing that message as much as possible.
Harshil, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on today. I said this before we clicked the record button. You're our first head of creative on the podcast, and it's been fantastic, kind of like hearing things from a different angle and getting a different take and a different aspect to the marketing side of things. But before I let you go, I'm going to take you through our quick fire round. So other than TotallyMoney, what's your favorite fintech brand, app, or fintech that you're just interested in keeping an eye on at the moment?
Yeah, that's a good one. Obviously, my favorite is TotallyMoney, but after that, I'd have to say Plum, I think, are really sort of nailing it right now. Their balance between brand and product proposition, really comes through every time you use the app. So, and once you're in, you're hooked. So yeah, I'm really enjoying using them at the moment.
If you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?
I think it would be not to be afraid of change. I've worked in so many different industries and had a number of different jobs. And I think when I was younger, you were kind of had that impression that you're not supposed to move around too much. It looks bad for future employers and stuff like that. And for one reason or another, I've managed to move around and better opportunities sometimes will come up and stuff. And looking back, that's been a really positive thing for me in my career, because just had that much more exposure to different experiences. So if I was to do it again, definitely don't be afraid of that change.
And my last and probably favourite question is, what's one thing that I haven't asked you that perhaps I should have?
If you were to ask me about kind of some of the positive things maybe about working in fintech, I'd probably say, we spoke about sometimes there's that restriction of creativity, or, you're kind of in a specific type of industry, so you have to kind of follow those rules. But in my experience of working in fintech and definitely at TotallyMoney, it has definitely been a really fun experience, because you are able to really explore creativity in a really meaningful way. And so, at the end of the day, we're trying to help people manage their finances and work with their money better. And seeing the reviews come in where someone said that they used our app and they were able to turn around their life because their credit score's gone up and things like that is quite rewarding. So yeah, you wouldn't think before you kind of work in this industry that you will get that kind of fulfillment, but yeah, you definitely do.
Amazing. Harshil, that's great to hear. And once again, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
The FML podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.